Welcome to Weirdly Forgotten. I'm Ripon. Imagine trying to explain Wi-Fi to someone in the 1890s. You'd probably sound like a madman, right? Well, decades before computers, before even television was a household item, one forgotten scientist described a global network of information with shocking accuracy. Was this man a prophet or just impossibly ahead of his time? Stick around to find out. Today, we take the internet for granted. We have the world's knowledge in our pockets, connected by invisible waves. We stream, we share, we search. But what if I told you the blueprint for this digital world wasn't born in Silicon Valley, but in 19th century Brussels, from the mind of a man most of us have never heard of? His name was Paul Otlet, and his story is one of the most incredible what-ifs in the history of technology. Born in 1868, Otlet was a Belgian lawyer, author, and peace activist. But his true passion, his obsession, was information. He lived in an era of explosive growth in publishing. Books, newspapers, and scientific journals were being printed faster than ever before. For most people, this was progress. For Otlet, it was a problem, a big one. He saw a jungle of paper, a chaotic flood of knowledge that was becoming impossible to navigate. How could humanity truly advance if its greatest discoveries were getting lost in the stacks? He believed that simply collecting books wasn't enough. We needed a way to connect the ideas inside them. This is where his vision takes a turn from librarian to futurist. Otlet wasn't just thinking about better card catalogs. He was dreaming of something entirely new. In 1895, alongside his colleague Henri Lafontaine, he began an undertaking of monumental ambition, the Mundaneum. Their goal was to create a master bibliography of all the world's published knowledge. Think of it as the ultimate card catalog. They created millions of index cards, each meticulously detailing a book, an article, a photograph. They developed a groundbreaking system called Universal Decimal Classification, a way to categorize and link diverse topics. But the cards themselves were just the beginning. The Mundaneum became Otlet's laboratory for a much grander idea. He started to imagine a system where people didn't have to physically travel to his archive in Brussels. He envisioned a future where anyone, anywhere, could submit a query, by telegraph, the high-tech communication of his day, and receive back not just a reference, but the actual information itself. He described a centralized repository of knowledge, accessible to all. Sound familiar? Let's dive into his writings, because this is where it gets truly spooky. Otlet described what he called a réseau, a network. He wrote about electric telescopes that would allow a user to read pages from books stored thousands of miles away. He imagined a screen where these pages would be projected. The user, sitting at their desk, could connect documents, navigate from a fact in one text to a related concept in another. He literally described hyperlinks. He called these connections symbolic links. Remember, this is in the early 1900s. The vacuum tube, a basic component of early electronics, had barely been invented. He envisioned a workstation, a personal desk equipped with a screen, a telephone, and access to this global network. He wrote, "From his armchair, the user will be able to see the whole of creation, in whole or in certain of its parts." He wasn't just predicting a global library. He was predicting the user experience of the internet. He talked about combining text, audio, and visual information into a single interconnected system. He was essentially describing multimedia and the World Wide Web decades before the words even existed. So why isn't Paul Otlet a household name like Thomas Edison or Alexander Graham Bell? Why isn't he celebrated as the grandfather of the internet? The answer, like his vision, is complex. For one, his ideas were simply too far ahead of the technology available. He had the software concept, but the hardware was a century away. He was describing cloud computing in an age of steam engines. Most of his contemporaries saw his project as a noble but hopelessly idealistic fantasy. Then came the brutal realities of the 20th century. The Mundaneum, with its millions of index cards, was a massive physical entity. During World War II, when Germany invaded Belgium, the Nazis saw little value in this universal archive of knowledge. They destroyed a huge portion of it, clearing out the space to house a collection of Third Reich art. They saw it as a pile of paper, not the seed of a revolution. A vast amount of Otlet's work, over 70 tons of material, was lost forever. Otlet himself died in 1944, a forgotten man, his grand vision seemingly buried with him. For decades, that's where the story ended. Paul Otlet was a footnote in the history of library science, a quirky idealist with an impossible dream. But then, something amazing happened. Technology caught up. As computer scientists in the 1960s and 70s began developing the early networks that would become the internet, they were solving the very problems Otlet had obsessed over: how to store, link, and retrieve vast amounts of information. Pioneers like Vinton Cerf and Tim Berners-Lee may not have known Otlet's name, but they were walking down the path he had mapped out in his mind 60 years earlier. It wasn't until the 1990s, as the World Wide Web exploded into public consciousness, that researchers rediscovered Otlet's work. They were stunned. Reading his descriptions from the 1930s was like finding a blueprint for the modern web, written in the language of the past. The electric telescopes were our monitors. The telephone queries were our search engines. The symbolic links were our hyperlinks. It was all there. His vision had not been wrong. It had just been waiting for the world to invent the machines capable of making it real. Today, the surviving part of the Mundaneum is a museum in Mons, Belgium. You can walk through rows of the original wooden drawers, pulling out the index cards that were the physical manifestation of Otlet's network. It feels like walking through a fossilized internet, a tangible reminder that every great invention begins as a strange, improbable idea. Paul Otlet's story is a powerful lesson. It teaches us that vision isn't limited by the technology of the day. It reminds us that some of the most important ideas can lie dormant for generations, waiting for their moment. He wasn't a prophet who saw a magical future. He was a brilliant logical thinker who saw a fundamental human need, the need to connect ideas, and followed that logic to its ultimate conclusion, even if that conclusion seemed like science fiction. He was, in the truest sense, a man ahead of his time, the genius who saw our world before it existed. Thank you so much for joining me on Weirdly Forgotten. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of the incredible people and ideas that history almost left behind. Let me know in the comments who you think is another forgotten visionary we should cover next. See you in the next one.